of what we've experienced over the last 30 years. When we began exploring some of the principles which we now know of as the balanced scorecard, we noticed some important things. For example, our research indicated that 80% of strategies failed, and they failed not because they weren't great, but rather because they weren't executed. In other words, the broken part of strategy is not coming up with a new one, but rather translating your existing strategy into action. And as we looked at the existing management systems, activities like costing, quality, and so forth, they all ignored important aspects, different aspects, but important aspects of how organizations operate. We decided to take a step back and look at the overall principles through which management operates, including both the tangible and intangible assets, issues like productivity, performance, the Romer-Brace white space issues, the Senge learning organization issues, and so forth. And here's what we observed. We observed that the way that management actually operates is as follows. They want to effectively fly at 30,000 feet. Think of looking outside a passenger airline window at full altitude. You see a broad stretch of the horizon. Think of that as your organization's horizon. And you want to find those puffs of smoke which are coming up, representing problems in the organization. At 30,000 feet, you need to begin using strategic tools so you can prioritize what parts of the organizational issues you need to focus in on. A simple example is this. If you're driving along and your check engine light goes on the car, you should pull over and call a tow truck and have the car repaired. But if instead of your strategy going to the office, you're going to the hospital in an emergency and the check engine light goes on, you're going to ignore it. The strategy tells us how to interpret the data. By providing management with a strategic tool to look at the data, to look at how the organization is performing, they can prioritize where they should be focusing their efforts. Then metaphorically, they want to move from 30,000 feet down to 20,000 feet. They're going to narrow the scope of information they're going to look at and begin looking at more operational tools in order to gain an understanding of what's causing that fire. Once they've gained that understanding, again, we want to narrow the amount of information they're looking at and get them down to 10,000 feet. We're going to begin providing them with diagnostic tools so that they can become more directional in their behavior. And then finally, we're going to take them down to ground level, where we're going to give them analytic tools so they can become more prescriptive in their behavior. And management is going to go from 30,000 feet down to ground level. And once they feel that issue has been managed appropriately, they're going to move back up to 30,000 feet to find the next operational issue that they should focus in on. Now, in the fullness of time, you want to begin giving other members of your organization the grant of authority to take the problem. So maybe to begin with, you'll drill down to the diagnostic level and then punt to a member of your team. Later on, once the competency is built, you'll only drill down to the operational level. And hopefully, eventually, you can just focus at the strategic level, which is the core job of the leadership team, and punt responsibility for the rest of this inquisition to the rest of the organization. So given that framework, we should now take a look at how we can capture and communicate information to support that process. At the strategic level, best practices are the balanced scorecard. The idea of capturing a clear view of what are the strategic objectives, how they link to overall success, and how important they are to the organization. Once we have that, we can overlay the information to let us know whether we're meeting targets, slightly below target, or significantly below target. That's sort of the 30,000-foot view that management should have. And obviously, if we have an issue with an objective, we should be able to drill down to the 20,000-foot level. So in this example, if we take a look at an objective like fast turnaround time, I should be able to click into that and drill into what are the core processes and projects which influence the overall performance of this strategic objective. That's a 20,000-foot view. That allows us to begin to see what part of the business we should be focusing in on, whether that's internal or external, whether it's leading or lagging, to be able to begin understanding what's caused the problem. Now, in the best of worlds, that's as far as the senior leadership team should go. The next step is to drill into more detail, what we're going to call a dashboard. Like the dashboard in your car or the space shuttle, you need to be a process expert in order to interpret the information on a dashboard. It's not intended for a wide audience, it's intended for the experts in that part of the organization. And it provides more detail and more compressed timelines to allow us to be able to begin to diagnose what's gone wrong and what we need to do about it. And then finally, from the dashboard, we need to get down to sort of the business intelligence or analytics level, where we're drilling into gory detail about how the organization is performing. So this roughly follows a footprint of how management wants to drill into the information. Now, as we take a look at this, there's some other characteristics I want to point out. We should, for example, have a strategic objective that starts at the top of the house and drills all the way to the bottom. If you think of an example like McDonald's, right? Fast food. Overall, there's a relationship between how fast you're served at the drive-through window and the overall impact on share price. Now, the leadership team needs to understand that relationship and be able to drill through the data to understand what that looks like. Doesn't necessarily mean the person at the drive-through window needs to be able to drill back up. Now, in some cases, that may be of interest. But the net is we need to, as a leadership team, understand that relationship. So if we have an objective like, penetrate new markets, that's going to cascade down to some operational objectives, and from there some tactics, and eventually down to specific tasks. Now, these words I've used are just words. Inside your organization, you may define these event horizons with different words, but conceptually, we're going to be drilling into more specific information. And one strategic objective may drill down to multiple operational objectives, and each multiple operational objective may drill down to multiple tactics, and each tactic might drill down to multiple tasks. So the total information hierarchy here could be hundreds or thousands of metrics, but it starts off with one simple objective at the top of the house. So an example might be what I used before, market penetration. And that's going to drill down to a number of operational objectives, one of which might be, say, price leadership. And within price leadership, it may drill down to multiple tactics, one of which might be simply, 10% undercut the competition. And the task related to that, again, multiple ones, one of which might be daily monitor the performance of the competition to understand what the pricing is. What's important to note here is not only does the concept become more specific, but the timeline compresses. The senior leadership team at the scorecard level should be looking out 1 to 5 years. Operational objectives maybe 1 to 5 quarters. Tactics maybe 1 to 5 months. And tasks 1 to 5 days. Now, these timelines vary based on the drumbeat of your business. Perhaps if you're someone like FedEx, Kinko's with a very dynamic business, all these timelines are shorter. And if you're, building a 10-year hydro dam project, maybe the event horizons are longer. But the net is there's a dynamic of the information, who looks at the information, and what sort of information should be contained at each level of the organization. We need to ensure that continuity, the drill down we see on the left, but at the end of the day, every person is going to look at a portion of that information. So I've described the strategy map as a corporate one, but in fact, you may drill those down by region or by brand. The net is your organization is multidimensional. It's a cube, and we need to be able to look at it from different faces depending on the common ways you look at that information. Impact diagrams are a way of drilling down into the detail a bit more without getting into the minutiae. There are many ways of representing that data, but we do feel the impact diagrams the most powerful. The dashboards is where it begins to get interesting. You see, in the old days, executive information systems used to have a lot of, pie charts and graphical images. But what we've learned is the data density in a dashboard has to be very high. These dashboards you see on the screen represent 10 or 20 pages of spreadsheet and detailed grid data. It's impossible for your brain to assimilate and understand the correlations of the data on page 3 compared to the data on page 17. We need a way to show all that information on a single form so that leadership can understand and see the correlation between different events and begin to understand the cross-functional nature or the interconnectedness of information. And then finally, of course, the agile analytics at the bottom need to underpin the thinking that's gone above. So as a reminder, these are the sort of the strata that we have inside the organization. And we need to also now begin worrying about format. How can we make this data available to the executives when and where it's appropriate? So if you're like most organizations these days, You have bits and pieces of this management framework in place already. You'll have some detailed analytics and spreadsheet type data, a few dashboards, maybe some sort of balanced scorecard or strategic view of the organization. The trick here is that we don't need to reinvent this stuff. In all cases, that information that you've invested in building out is important to the organization. You wouldn't have invested in it otherwise. The trick is to join the dots, form one cohesive organization system across those different islands of automation. So to bring it back into context, we're going to understand that those strategic views give you the opportunity to prioritize and communicate organization focus. Impact diagrams provide an understanding through an operational diagnostic of the organization. Dashboards give you the directional information, and the analytics provide you what you need to enable your prescriptive type behaviors in the organization. Now, this is sort of conceptual. Let's